Hi everyone, and today I wanted to talk to you about how we can make sure that machine learning projects will keep delivering long-term value long after their developments have been stopped. To do so, I will focus on three different topics. First of all, when to pull the plug, then how we can go about looking for trouble, and finally, building a brick house. But first, we should answer a question. Why is it important for us to stop developing a machine learning project? And in today's world, the main answer to this question is that companies often have an unlimited list of new projects that they want to start that have untapped potential that can be delivered to the company. However, what often happens is that this infinite list of projects clashes with the limited resources that companies often have, especially the number of developers. And, as they cannot grow their teams overnight and hire new developers from one day to the other, the only solution is to stop developing a certain project and then moving that team on to another one. This brings us on to what I think it's a process, and that is that you should look at stopping developing a project as a process that things can go very wrong. And the first step in this process is to clearly determine which project should not be developed further. Because if you choose the wrong project, you could be losing more potential from this project by developing it a further couple of months than the value that the new project will bring you. Then the second step is misdiagnosing issues. If you miss issues with your current project, those issues will come back to haunt you later on and make your development in your new projects a lot harder. And the final step is how we can make sure that we build something truly robust that will deliver long-term value. So let us start by discussing when we should pull the plug. And when typically you start these conversations, you can find a lot of inertia coming from the squad that's currently working on the project that you want to no longer develop. And typically, these come from two different perspectives. The first perspective is the perspective of the scientists, which, a lot of the times, they can identify a lot of potential new improvements or modeling approaches to extract additional value from this project. The other perspective is from business stakeholders that can come to you and tell you that they think there is still business value to be extracted from the current project. However, both of these approaches have dangers with them, and you should be careful. From the data science perspective, it means that additional modeling developments can have decreasing business value. On the other side of the coin, the business side, you can have projects that want to go for that last percentage point of performance, but that can be often an inglorious task. And we can see both of these issues with a simple theoretical example. In this case, we have a simple machine learning model whose job is to try to predict which will be the 10 customers that will generate the most revenue for our company. And currently, we have a model into production that tells us that it has an 80% accuracy, meaning it correctly predicts 8 out of the 10 customers. And then the data science team comes to us and tells us we trained a new model and we managed to improve this accuracy from 80% to 90%. So, great, time to celebrate, we did a 10 percentage point increase in accuracy. But if we bring the business side back into the frame, we see that all this increase in performance only generated an additional dollar of revenue. So, we end up doing almost a theoretical exercise of machine learning for the machine learning's sake, without giving any additional revenue to the company and without benefiting anyone. But, on the other side of the coin, the same thing can happen. You can have the best-intentioned business manager come to you and tell you, okay, at the start of our project, we wanted to have this project generating $327 of revenue. And we are currently sitting at $324. And for us, it seems that this 1% increase in revenue is fair, and with a couple more weeks of development, we could achieve our initial objectives. But if once again we bring the data science perspective into this, you see that even with the most perfect model right now, you could only deliver $328 of revenue. This means that you need to have an almost perfect model to achieve what seemed at first a very reasonable goal. So the solution becomes clear. You should have in mind both of these perspectives when you are doing these discussions. And especially, you should keep them during the whole life cycle of your project. This way, once you deliver new features or a new model improvement, stakeholders on both sides will understand that you are approaching what is the limit value that can be extracted from your current project. Now that we have determined that we have our project that we want to close and no longer want to develop and want to live on its own, we have a couple of weeks of development, and we should start looking for issues. And the main issue that squads often face is that they have an almost infinite number of user stories or tasks that they want to perform to improve a model. What happens is that the project has to be closer sooner rather than later, and the team has to be moved on. So you don't have time to make all those improvements that you want to do. Then prioritization becomes key. And this prioritization will vary a lot from team to team, from project to project, and even from company to company. However, there are some general rules of thumb that we can try and use to guide us in this process. The first rule of thumb that we can use is that what today takes 1 hour, in the future will take 3 times longer. And this idea comes from the fact that in the future, you will be working on your new project, and if you have to perform a certain task in an older project, the first thing you have to deal with is context switching. So you have to stop doing what you are doing, you have to refocus your mindset and your attention to an older project that you have not worked on, and then the second step will be reviewing documentation, because you will not remember the details of what you have to do on that project. And only after both of these steps are you able to finally start the performance of that simple task. Then, the second general rule of thumb here that we should use is that this is the last time that developers will fully understand the project, meaning any key insights, any key details, or key findings should be documented right now before the squad is moved on. And third, and often most overlooked one, is a project that requires 5 less minutes of maintenance frequently trumps one with 5% more performance. And this happens because squads are typically focused on the raw performance of the model and the value that they are bringing. However, those 5 minutes of maintenance start to stack up. They start stacking up over days, over weeks, over months, over years of maintenance. And those are minutes that you could be using, your developers, to develop new features that bring additional value to your company on other projects. So you should look at your tasks and take all of this into consideration, and instead of performing a task, for example, that would give 5% more performance, maybe improving the maintenance times will actually deliver more value to your company. Now that you have taken a look at some general rules, we can start discussing some more, let's say, detailed aspects of tasks that can be performed by the squad. And the first one, and most obvious one, is fixing bugs and issues. And the best solution is also an easy one, just fix the bug. But that's easier said than done. A lot of the time, squads face issues and bugs that are outside of their control, that they cannot fix. And so comes into frame the second best solution, implementing fallbacks, for example. Something that allows the maintainers to, instead of having to drop everything that they are doing because a bug occurred in the older project, they can simply try to perform their tasks in a way that, for example, they only have to intervene at the end of the day or at the end of the week. This increases their productivity significantly. And if a fallback is not possible, you should at least document the solution and the fix that is to be implemented. The second group of tasks is one that comes from the fact that we all would love to work on perfect projects. That project where the developers write clean code at first, where we build something and we document it instantly, and if we make any change to a machine learning pipeline, we immediately update all the documentation regarding it. The truth is that most of us are not working on those projects. And so it is essential that at the end of your project, you are able to have some time to review all the documentation that you have on the project and making sure that it's up to date and clear to anyone that will need it in the future. And there is another, even more ignored aspect on this problem, which is organization. Because today, it may seem obvious to you that you have been working 2 years in a project that the file to train a model is inside folder X, inside folder Y, inside folder Z. But that will not be obvious to anyone that has to maintain that project in the future and has not worked on that project. And so you should make sure that you organize your project in a way that it's clear and easy for anyone to understand, and that has to come and maintain it to immediately know where the things that he needs are. And this brings us to the final more detailed tasks, which regards tracking critical information. And this can come in a lot of forms. You can build a dashboard, something that is fully automated and updates minute by minute, or it can be as simple as, for example, an email to all the stakeholders. But you should not mistake the means for the end here. And the end goal here is that you know that there is some information that stakeholders, both from data and business side, will need long after your development on the project has stopped. And for example, this can be on the data side, someone comes to you and asks you how the model is performing after months of being in production, or if your data has quality. On the business side, can be as easy as we have a main KPI that we measure our team on, and we would like to have access to it from time to time. And so you should, as a squad, identify all this information that is critical and make sure that it's easily accessible and easily shared. And now that we have spent our last couple of weeks improving our performance and our models and trying to solve every issue that we could find, we ask the question, have we built something truly robust? And we can start with 3 principal ideas that summarize everything that we have been discussing up until this point. And the first idea is forget about it. Even if in a project it is extremely necessary and cannot be done without manual intervention, you can still be mindful of the developer's time. Instead of needing manual intervention, for example, at 11:38 on the dot every morning, maybe you just require intervention at the end of the day, after the developer has finished all his work, or in the morning before it starts its work. Additionally, you can also build automatic alarms that tell the developer, hey, you need to perform this task now or in a couple of minutes. This way, you have 2 main benefits for your developers. The first and most obvious one is productivity. No one is productive if they have to stop what they are doing right now to perform something in another project. But the second one, and most important of all, is the happiness of your developers. No one wants to be working on a project and developing a project while constantly having to worry on the back of their mind if they performed some maintenance task on that older project that closed 6 months ago. If you are able to make sure that developers can fully focus on the task at hand, you'll make them much happier and will increase their productivity. Then we have here our second idea, which is simplicity is foolproof. And this comes from the fact that you should not assume anything about the maintainers of your project in the future. Even if something is very obvious to you now and you think it's general knowledge, you should still document it. You should face your documentation of your project as a cooking recipe. A cooking recipe is made so that anyone, even someone that has no experience with that dish, is able to prepare it by following a certain number of simple steps. And your documentation should be the same. Anyone that has not worked on your project should be able to maintain it with just the correct documentation. A great way that you can make sure that you have built an amazing documentation is go ask a colleague of yours that has still not worked on the project. So then you will read your documentation, and at the end you may ask him, okay, do you feel comfortable to maintain this project with the documentation that I've written? And if the answer is yes, congratulations. You have built the documentation that is robust and clear for anyone in the future to use it. And third and final important point that you should try and answer is we don't need no analysis. And this brings us back to the fact that information about this project will be needed long after there is no squad developing actively. And this means that any information that stakeholders will ask of the project should be documented and easily accessible. For example, even if a maintainer never worked on the project, you can leave them simple solutions. It can be as simple as a SQL query that they simply run that query, and it gives them the KPI that they need to share with the business. This means that maintainers don't need to know details about your data, meaning they don't need to know specific how the joins work or what is the meaning behind all those columns. They just need to run the query. And additionally, they don't even need to understand exactly how that KPI is computed, because you have built everything so that they can simply follow your steps and share the information with anyone that needs it. And final, and most important of all, to make sure that you have built something truly robust, you should make sure that you have open lines of communications with your end users. Because the truth is, your developers will move on from this project and on to greener pastures and new projects, but your end users are stuck with using the data that is being delivered by this project. And they cannot feel like they are shouting into a void every time they have an issue. And so, if you build open lines of communications, you gain a lot of benefits. The first benefit is performance. You can have the most advanced dashboard and monitoring the model performance and data drifts, but those can take weeks until you notice there is an issue with your data or your model. End users, a lot of the times, in a single day, can tell you that something went really wrong with the data that you deliver to them. The second benefit is the sharing of information. If your end users depend on, for example, a KPI to understand how they have been performing in the last couple of months, if they have open lines of communications, it's much easier for them to ask you what is the KPI and how it is evolving in the last couple of months, and it will increase their interest in the project and using the data that you are feeding them. And finally, and most important of all, user confidence. Because if you allow the user's concerns and what are small issues at first to go unresolved and feeling like no one is hearing them or doing anything about them, you will allow those small discomforts to snowball into full distrust. And once you have full distrust of the users on your model, no one will use the data that you are feeding them. And in that case, you will have the most robust machine learning model on the face of the earth that no one is using and that is delivering no value to no one. And with this in mind, with all these discussions, we can go back to what was our process at the beginning. And we can start looking at the solutions for each one of the steps that we identified. In the first step, when should we close the project? Well, we should close the project when we take into consideration both the data science perspective and the business perspective and make sure there is no value, additional value to be extracted from it. Then, how can we diagnose issues? We should make sure that we track all the issues that pop out and we have a clear answer on how it should be tackled in the future. And finally, how can we make sure that we build something truly robust? Well, we make sure that our machine learning model can stand on its own without any babysitting and that is poised to deliver long-term value to the company long after the developments have ended. And with that, I think it's time to pull the plug on this presentation. Thank you very much.